Welcome to a new episode of Future Frame TV, the collective podcast of Traces and Dreams. I am Connie Nshemereirwe and I am the host of A is Not for Apple, a series exploring the extent to which our education systems reflect our lived experiences as Africans and how we can transform the education system to help us more fruitfully engage with the challenges and inconsistencies that we see in our reality. My guest today is Professor Dexter Tagwireyi, an academic pharmacist-toxicologist and associate professor of pharmacy at the University of Zimbabwe. Dexter, you are very welcome.
Thank you very much, Connie, for having me here. It's such an honor to be able to sit with you and just chat concerning these very pertinent issues.
Thanks, Dexter. Before I go any further, Dexter, what exactly is an academic pharmacist-toxicologist?
All right, thank you, Connie. So basically, I'm an academic. I work at the university. Like you said, I'm an associate professor of pharmacy, but my professional background is in pharmacy. So I am actually a registered pharmacist, which is in the area of pharmacy, which I practice is academia, basically teaching and research. But I'm also a toxicologist, meaning that I have expertise in the study of poisons and toxic substances. And I'm also on a professional register as a toxicologist, but I do most of my toxicology in a university setting, which then makes me an academic toxicologist as well. So in a nutshell, that's how I would describe myself as an academic pharmacist and toxicologist.
Okay, so you're an academic toxicologist and an academic pharmacist, is what I've understood.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So, exactly.
The first question that I always ask my guests when I know what it is they do is when you hear the phrase, A is not for Apple, Dexter, what comes to mind?
When I saw it, after the invitation that you gave to me, the first thing that came to mind is probably not what should have come to mind, because later on I thought maybe something else should have come to mind. But the first thing which came to mind was, I think this podcast will not work for iOS or Apple type of appliances or gadgets. But then later on, I was thinking A is for Apple when you're in grade 1 and you're being taught the alphabet. Ordinarily, they would say A for ant or A for Apple. So yeah, that's sort of what came to my mind when I heard that, when I saw it.
All right. So do you have apples in Zimbabwe? Are you a fan of apples? Were you a fan since you were a child? Or did you see them later?
No, I grew up with my grandmother, who was a health freak. So we did grow up with apples. We did grow up with oranges and all the fruits that we have here. So yes, I did know apples as a young man, a young boy.
You're the first of my guests to have known apple when it was introduced to them when they were in grade 1. I first saw an apple or tasted an apple when I was about 15. And that's because it doesn't grow anywhere in Uganda. In the last few years, it now grows in parts of the southern Uganda. But for me, it was a completely abstract concept until the age of 15. So it's part of why I thought I should name this podcast, A is not for Apple. But interesting that you at least knew like you had experienced an apple before.
Yes, we had experienced an apple before. And then maybe just thinking the alphabet, which I remember at grade 1, had an ant. I'm not sure if it was apple, but anyway, yeah.
Well, I've always thought Zimbabwe actually was quite an advanced education system, I must say. We Ugandans are a little bit stuck in the past. To this day, A is still the first letter you see on an alphabet chart. And for many, many rural children who are the majority in the education system, they will have never seen an apple and they won't know what it is. But of course, they will have seen ants, they'll have seen anthills. Some may have seen antelopes, but may not have seen apple. Anyway, so speaking of your education journey, I suppose you did not grow up thinking you wanted to be a toxicologist, but maybe you wanted to be a pharmacist. How did it come about? How did you arrive at what you do?
Okay, thank you for that question, Connie. So growing up, myself and a couple of friends, there were two things that we wanted to become. So the first thing was a scientist. And I guess the influence was from, I guess maybe it was the cartoons that we used to see back then, as well as some of the comic books that we had. Then the second thing, which probably every boy growing up during my time wanted to be, was to be a spy or some special detective. And that came from reading books like Three Investigators and Hardy Boys and related books. So even at primary school, when we were writing the essays, I would say I want to be a scientist. And one of the things that we used to do growing up would be to collect different berries, different leaves. I'm sure most children grow up like that. Then you crush them, and then you pretend that you've come up with a new drug to treat something novel. Or sometimes you try to feed these things to poor, unsuspecting animals if you would get your hands on them. So I think from there, I think my love for science just grew. And for me to eventually get into pharmacy, actually, it was our chemistry teacher at ordinary level, who went with me also to advanced level, Mr. Mazwi, that was his name, who made chemistry appear as though it was the only subject on the face of the earth. So he'd talk about pharmacy and he'd talk about, how chemistry was. So he made chemistry so much fun. And that's how then I gravitated towards pharmacy. And then when you're within the discipline of pharmacy, I was then introduced to toxicology, the study of poisons, which have always fascinated me during my undergraduate studies. And that's how then I also took the route towards toxicology. So in a nutshell, that's how I ended up being where I am. Yeah.
Interesting. You assume that many of us were crushing leaves and trying to feed animals, but actually, I have never heard that a child was doing that. I wonder if was your grandmother also one of those who used herbs, or I wonder where you got that. I doubt you even saw it on TV, because I too watch these cartoons. I don't recall wanting to crush up berries and leaves to feed, to make drugs.
Yeah, so the science aspect of it is the one that we get from your cartoons and books. But my grandmother was a nurse, actually. So when we grew up with lots of drugs. If you had a flu, you'd get, benzyl penicillin. By the time I was at high school, I knew there was something called penicillin V, because she was somebody who was like that. But then in terms of the crushing of flowers and plants, that's how we used to play as boys. And we used to enjoy doing that, coming up with all these different concoctions.
Well, fortunately for you, I hope you didn't try to eat some of them, otherwise you might have poisoned yourself, I imagine. And the other thing that interests me is that you said your chemistry teacher was very influential in getting you to love chemistry and to get fascinated by it. And I certainly agree that teachers are extremely important in helping us really make choices for our future. And now coming to your journey as a toxicologist in particular, or a pharmacist, or a person who studies how drugs are developed, I guess, I wonder how you see the progress in us developing drugs or harnessing the natural environment towards creating drugs as an industry across the continent. I don't know, how do you see how well developed this is, or how much more developed it could be?
So perhaps in answering it, I will answer it from three different perspectives. because you had two questions in one, sort of. The first one, I'll talk about the issue of the herbal products, the ones that we should harness from our own natural environment, which is an area of interest of mine. My research over the past few years has been in trying to come up with formulations for plants, from plants, which could be used in the management of a number of neuropsychiatric illnesses, which is where I tend to gravitate towards. I feel that as a continent, as Africa, with regards to herbal products, there's definitely a place for us. I mean, looking at the history of how many of the drugs came into play, not even more than, a few hundred years ago, they used to get drugs from herbs. And ultimately, people started to extract the active ingredients. And then with time now, we are synthesizing them. And I feel that there are a number of plants which can actually be quite important here in our own African setting that we could even export to other people if we took the time to systematically develop them. And then with regards to, perhaps what I may refer to as allopathic medicines or Western medicines, your paracetamols and related drugs, I feel that there's a space for us as Africans in what is called generic manufacturing, where the active ingredient is already known and we just come up with different formulations, be it a tablet, be it, a syrup or whatever. The way that the Indians have actually taken the global market, they just wait for molecules which have been discovered a long time ago and come up with different formulations for that. So there's a direction definitely in that way as well. The third facet might be more to do with coming up with actual molecules, brand new molecules to treat the diseases that we have. And at the moment, I feel that the first world or developed countries are, a couple of centuries ahead of us. And that perhaps instead of wasting too much time in that space, we can allow them to continue finding out new molecules. And instead, we just concentrate on one, getting the generics, making our own generics from whatever new molecules are there. And secondly, maybe trying to come up with our own formulations from our own herbs. And how far we are, well, some people have advanced pretty well, especially those who have gone into different partnerships with some pharmaceutical companies from elsewhere with regards to generic manufacturing. I think Uganda is probably one of the countries as well, which has gone into such a partnership, I think. So yeah, we're going there slowly, but it's been a bit too slow in my opinion.
I do actually live not far from such a facility. I think we make, actually I should find out what we make, but there's a whole big facility here that manufactures drugs. I don't know what drugs. So you're saying that we could be using molecules that already exist to create the drugs that are already being created, I guess at much lower, then we would have them at much lower cost. But you also mentioned that there is a lot of potential in the undiscovered molecules, in the unknown cures that we can harness from nature. To what extent do you think our native knowledge or indigenous knowledge about these kind of things can be useful or has been useful?
In terms of can be useful, I am convinced that it can be useful. And again, my conviction comes from the fact that if you look at the history of pharmacy, or even the pharmaceutical industry, or even medicines and drugs, the history actually goes back to plants. So at the very basic, or at the very least, what we can do is to develop complementary medicines, not necessarily pure chemicals, but complementary medicines that you can take, in addition to your paracetamol or whatever else. A classical example of this would be your St. John's wort, which at the moment is still being used as an extract, discovered in Europe. It's a complementary medicine, and it has been found to actually be quite effective clinically for the management of mild to moderate depression. So there is lots of scope. Whether we have done a lot or whether we have really progressed as we should, I do not think so. And I think it comes back to the cultural issues, in my opinion, especially with regards to traditional African medicine. the traditional medical practitioner normally doesn't like sharing his or her knowledge with anyone else. And then what then happens is that they then die with all this knowledge if there wasn't somebody to pass it on to. And as a result, there's always this gap. There's nothing which is like systematic. We're not really building in a systematic manner because it's just like little packets. And then afterwards, there's nothing. So we could do more. But I think it now takes a social dimension as opposed to, the more scientific one.
Yeah. So you mentioned that many African herbalists do not want to share their knowledge. I guess it's because then they lose their economic advantage. I suppose they also know how well their drugs work. I was going to say, maybe they don't even really know how they work, but that's a judgment that I'm passing on them. I may be wrong. What happens here in Uganda, though, is that many people do trust these drugs, but it's not clear what the drugs do. It's not clear what the herbs do. They cure everything and nothing. Here in Uganda, we have a certain attitude towards African medicine or herbalists. Some of us think that surely one plant cannot cure all these diseases that it says it will cure. Some of them are complete charlatans. They'll tell you this cures this and it doesn't really. And unfortunately, sometimes people will shun Western medicine and try these other herbal remedies and end up losing their lives or failing to cure the disease. So it's really mixed, our relationship with these herbalists. And also, the less educated you are, or rather, the more you use these kind of herbalists, the less educated you're perceived to be. Like if you're educated, you should surely be using Western medicine. So I feel like that also might be an obstacle for us for this to be embraced further. But that's for the regular person. As for the professional like you, I guess of course you can understand that, that the basis of all drugs more or less is plants. And you would be curious to know, if you claim that this plant heals this and this, can we test it and see? But then maybe they won't tell you exactly how to administer it or how it works, or they don't collect data. They're not scientists. And so I can see that also might present a difficulty. What I want to shift to a little bit is to think about how our schooling goes in that regard. We learn basic science, but we probably do not learn applications in basic science. You learn theory, you learn about what people found out. You were lucky enough that your chemistry teacher could show you how chemistry related to life. But in our education system, at least, a lot of what you learn in school is really abstract and divorced from your daily life. I don't know how it is in Zimbabwe, and how you can, for instance, when people come into the pharmacy undergrad studies, to what extent they're really aware of the wealth of things that are around them in their environment, and if that came through in the education system.
It's difficult to just give an upright, straight answer. But looking at my own educational journey, I enjoyed it whenever the teacher would take us out of the classroom, to either show us something, doing something, or just show us something as opposed to just, doing the theory. It is true that, to some extent, the way that we were brought up educationally is that you really basically study to pass, in essence. And it's something which I'm always at war with, with my own kids as well as my students. That when you come to university, you're not coming to university to pass and get a degree, but you're coming to be equipped with skills, competencies, things that you can then be able to use to make society a better place. But for that transition to occur, having been in an educational system where when you're the highest in the class, you become the teacher's pet and other things like that. And the ones who are a bit curious, and seem to be going off tangent might be, frowned upon. Then it becomes a bit difficult to then relate or put those things into actual practice. So I do agree. The educational system has been quite abstract for a while, although I think I see some changes. I see my youngest, she's doing her ordinary levels right now. And in terms of the type of questions which they are being asked, there is a lot of application now coming in. Where if you're learning about, I don't know, nuclear physics, they want you to say, where are these principles actually applied in everyday life. So there's a change which is coming in.
Good. As I said, I've always thought that Zimbabwe had a superior education system to many systems. And it's not that I've studied the education system, but I've interacted with a lot of Zimbabweans. And I find that you have quite a broad education compared to a lot of other Africans that I meet. But anyway, now shifting up, shifting to the future. And as an educator, one of the things that really concerns me, of course, is the millions and millions of children that are going to be added to the African population. I think we are told that we might double in population in another 25 to 30 years. That's a lot of children. And the formal education systems in my country and in countries around me are already bursting at the seams to take in all these children. And they're not also able to adapt fast enough to what is needed for the future. So I wonder, going back to the potential that Africa has, or what we have as a natural environment, as a possibility to create new drugs or create these other complementary drugs that you spoke about, how do you see the opportunity to make sure that these children that are being born have a better chance to actualize that opportunity for us?
So I think, in my opinion, there's a Zimbabwean, a Shona proverb, which goes, "Simbinuro aicha pisa," which means you shape iron whilst it's still hot. And in essence, what it would probably relate to is, we should catch them young. So as these youngsters are coming into primary education, already in our minds, in our curricula, in the plan of action that we have, we should already be thinking about the end result that we're looking at. If we say that Africa must start to produce things for itself, we can't then start, trying to change the way our children think when they get to university. But it must be something which begins even at preschool. As they're doing their drawings, they're coloring people who are making something. As they are doing their letters, whatever else, it's in their mind, we have got it within us to be able to make things, which unfortunately over the years, I think, because of our colonial history, we've always been brought up to think that we are maintainers. We can't really make anything new. And, what we do is to maintain systems which are already there. And indeed, our educational system was made that way. And that's the reason why, in my opinion, you'd find we had very strong theory. Because, in order for you to maintain some things, you just need to have a theoretical basis and, maybe know how the systems work. But we have to change that in our kids. When they are playing games, we're having competitions. It's competitions where if somebody produces something, and in terms of production, it's not necessarily, a product as in something which is tangible. They could come up with new ways of doing things, new questionnaires which could be used for psychology or whatever else. But it starts there right from the beginning. And then we integrate it and go up until they get to university level, college level, the different vocations. I think if I can just quickly say something in that direction. So you would be aware that we are under a new dispensation in Zimbabwe since 2017. there was a change in government. And the new Minister of Higher Tertiary Education, Science and Technology, together with other colleagues, they looked at the system of the universities. And here I'll talk specifically about the universities. And the university system that we adopted was from the British system, because we were a British colony. And for someone to progress as an academic, there were 3 things which are required. And you had to be good at teaching, at least satisfactory teaching, community service, and research. And that's how it is worldwide. But you see, that system, it's a system which promotes more of the theory, so to speak, because it doesn't really push for industrialization so much. So a lecturer can go through and have an illustrious career without having industrialized anything and die very poor. So what Zimbabwe has done now with the ministry is they've come up with what's called Education 5.0, which is almost Education 3.0, which has got those 3. But now for me to get promoted, in addition to the teaching, community engagement and research, I'm now expected to show some form of innovation. And I'm now expected to show that I'm contributing to industry in one way or the other. And the reason why, Zimbabwe took that pathway is because we realized that, if we do not change the way that we are doing things, we'll continue getting the same results. So now I am forced to, whereas in the past I could just be happy with doing experiments with my animals and say, oh, exciting result, I have added to knowledge. Now my bosses will ask me, so what products have you brought to this university, Dexter? So that type of thinking, if we can then bring it all the way down, from preschool, primary school, then I am sure in a few years' time, as all these kids are coming up, we've got kids who know that we've got the ability to be able to make things to give to the world and bring money, needed Forex into our own countries. So that's my thinking.
Well, as I said, Dexter, that's really brilliant. And no wonder you Zimbabweans have come up with it. I really, really admire you guys and the way you think about things. And so what I take from that is that right from the beginning, we should infuse the mindset of creating things beyond just knowing things and saying things, so that everything that we see around us is an opportunity to create or make or solve problems, as opposed to an opportunity for us to observe and describe and talk about. I really find that is a big part of how our education system goes. So your own Ministry of Education is already doing a good job. And I wonder what, if you were to advise a country like ours, you said that if it was possible, or rather even for your own country, you said if it was possible, this thinking could come not just at the university, it's maybe a little bit too late. It could start even earlier. What would be the thing that you would do tomorrow? What do you think is the linchpin? What's the thing in the schooling system that one should start with? If you had the power to create this kind of education system.
I think the first step would be the curriculum, the documents, the things that will then format our children. Because once that's done and set, teachers are taught to follow a curriculum and certain set objectives. And as long as the curriculum is very clear and we get necessary buy-in, I think we can start to change, the mentality. And, as I'm thinking, the change in mentality it goes just beyond that, because you see, if right now a Zimbabwean is to create something in Zimbabwe, chances are high that even his fellow friends would be like, does that thing really work? And that's the whole mental shift that we need to take care of.
That's the unfortunate reality. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So together with the curriculum change, we would need lots of change in mentality to tell ourselves that no, yes, we can.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody does something good, we shout at the top of the mountain and say, you see. And when you do that, then even the timid ones who are in their closets will also start coming up and saying, oh, so maybe it's possible. So
yeah. No, I'm really inspired by the vision, by the picture that you paint. And I'm thinking that similar to the way that you have been motivated at the university level, given by the policy that you must have these 2 extra things in addition to the 3, I suppose teachers too, here teachers and head teachers are motivated by the number of children who pass exams. So sometimes, and I do see that we change curricula and we retrain teachers, but the incentives stay the same. They say the same, you should pass so many children. So sometimes even when we change, so in addition, I guess I'm just building on what you're saying, that when you were saying that if the incentives for schools now becomes, what are the things that people are producing? Maybe that's part of how people are examined, or how people progress in the school system, or how they end up in the newspapers as having done very well. It might also be, so we could add certain other incentives. You said at the very beginning that many of us, the main incentive was to pass exams, and this continues all through to university. So just to build on what you're saying, I think in addition to changing the curriculum, training the teachers, we might add, show us what you're producing. And I think it would also solve the problem that you just mentioned about how we may not value what we produce. If 1 million children are producing things, some of those things are going to be very, very good. And if the next generation is adding to what has been created, we are going to improve. And soon we shall value the things that we create, because it will just be a culture that we create things and we solve problems and we live better because of it. So I think that's a really great vision that you paint.
Absolutely. Just to add to what you're saying, like I said earlier, the issue of incentive, what you're saying, that's really spot on. Because people basically do what they're incentivized to do. So in order to transition from this education 3.0 to the education 5.0, now a lecturer can produce a patent and say, okay, I'm submitting this, and it is equivalent to a certain number of academic publications. And if somebody produces a product which they've commercialized, it's also equivalent to a certain number of academic publications. So therefore, it then focuses people to the things or the outputs which you ultimately want. So yes, definitely the issue of incentivizing is an important one if anything is to work.
Yeah. All right. So I think I really have enjoyed speaking with you today, Dexter, and you've given me some very good ideas about how we might transform our education system in such a way that we might make more use of our natural giftings, our natural environment, solving our own problems, creating more, rather than just knowing and repeating what we know. So thank you very much for appearing on the podcast, and maybe speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Connie, for having me here.